Of Sammy Sosa or Mark McGwire, who do you think is more likely to have not taken performance-enhancing drugs of the two?
Me. None of the above. I think it's pretty much a metaphysical certitude that both of them have. I mean, McGwire has done everything you could possibly do other than admit it, and Sammy Sosa has gone through the most unique second puberty since Barry Bonds. So I think it's about as likely as the fact that monkeys will soon fly out of my rectum, that neither one of them have ever taken steroids.
How did I know you're going to that card? You know what's interesting about this is when you look at baseball history prior to the 1980s, typically players didn't get much bigger.
No. And if you
cow's milk, potentially?
Well, maybe they breastfed into their 20s, but that's not important now. What is interesting is that if you watch ESPN Classic, the players in the 60s don't look much different than the players in the 80s, really into the early to mid-90s. And I think the one thing that's the most condemning of that entire era are the kinds of stats, John, those players put up after their 33rd, 34th, 35th birthday, where you saw players that were great in our youth, like Jim Rice, the great former left fielder for the Red Sox. He hits the age of 33, and his numbers go way down. That's why it took him 15 years to get into the Hall of Fame. You see that with running backs in the NFL. They hit 30, and they have a tendency to go downhill after that because of the wear and tear. The amount of home runs and numbers that these players of this era put up, well past their 34th, 35th, 36th birthdays, there's really only one player in the history of Major League Baseball that has put up those kinds of numbers at that age, and that was Hank Aaron, who won the all-time home run crown by basically hitting 30 to 40 home runs a year every year for 20 years. Take him away, and there's just not another record of players doing this well into their late 30s like the players that did it during the steroid era. So, therefore, if one era did it differently than every other era has done that, you got to look for what happened in that era that didn't happen in other eras, right? What happened in this era that didn't happen in the other era or in the other eras? Steroids. So I think it's reasonable to assume by simple Socrates deductive reasoning that those guys were all juiced up.
It's hard to gain weight when you're on speed, too.
Indeed. I mean, when you're on speed and when you are trolling for as many groupies as they were back in the 70s and the 80s, very difficult.